I've tried to do my best to be as accessible as possible, meet with constituents, have teletown halls, but there's obviously been a real desire to have a live town hall. With that said, I wanted to make sure that in having a live town hall, we also made it so that those who couldn't be here, either by virtue of space capacity or because they weren't able to come at that particular time, that we did it in a way that they were able to observe when they felt like observing the town hall. A couple other preliminary things that I want you all to be aware about. Bill Mason, who has a talk show on WCHE 1520 AM, has moderated political debates in the past. He moderated a debate that I was part of in 2014. And so my thought was to have him sort of take the questions that you may have, sift through them so that we're getting questions that are of a variety and there's no redundancy. I met with a group of activists who was outside my office. It was probably 6 weeks ago, and we met for, I don't know, an hour and a half, and I'll answer any question that any of you have today. But there was a point in time where I thought I was answering the same Trump-Russia question like over and over. And so I want to make sure that we're hitting as many topics as possible. Another thing that I want everybody to be aware of in terms of why did I have to register today? We wanted to make sure that everybody here was a constituent because if you'll notice with town halls around the country, if you advertise a town hall and people just sort of swamp in, a lot of times they're not necessarily people from your congressional district. And a lot of times there's a lot of catcalls and booing and whatever. And by the way, if anybody wants to boo at something I say, feel free to boo. But I want to make sure that it's done in a way that the video is able to hear what I have to say and hear the question. So when it's videotaped, everybody watching it is able to hear both what I have to say as well as what the issues being presented are. There's been a lot of feedback that I've gotten in my office in terms of phone calls, emails, Facebook, anything else you may think, any other means of communication, writing letters. I welcome all that. I think it's very important for me as your member of Congress to hear what everyone has to say, whether I agree with you or not, or whether you agree with a particular vote that I take or not. We are a democracy. There is going to be a variety of opinions. And my sense is that we are in a moment of time where there is a heightened element of activism, by a lot of the constituency out there. And I think that's a good thing. We could go back and quote de Tocqueville or a number of Supreme Court justices or philosophers or statesmen who say that the only way that we're going to be able to keep our republic and increase activism and make sure that our elected officials are accountable is to make sure that our citizens are engaged, care about what's going on in our country, and have the ability to hold their elected officials accountable, be it through criticism, be it through suggestion, be it through asking questions and getting responses. So with that, I'm sure there's a couple other things I might want to preliminary say, but let's just get started because the more questions we get to, the better. Bill Mason, you probably have some, let's just turn it over to you.
Well, a whole stack of questions as we talked about. We're going to try to get to as many as possible.
Oh, Bill, come over here because, just so you know, in terms of this courthouse, we're actually not supposed to even have video recording in here, but I convinced the president judge that provided that the video camera doesn't get any windows or doorways that we can, so when you're going to ask a question, it'll be up here. But Bill, come on, you're in between the blue lines, so you're good.
In between the blue lines. So once again, thanks for your patience and for being here. We're going to try to get to everyone if possible with at least one question. When I call your name, just come up. We've got a microphone right here for you. And the first question is from Lisa Longo of Phoenixville.
Lisa visited me in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago, right, Lisa?
Yes, I did.
Phoenixville School Board member.
Yes, good to see you, Congressman. So my question has to do with fiscal responsibility, and I want to know, Congressman, will you insist that any infrastructure program be fully appropriated, and if Donald Trump's plan does not appropriate the funds, will you oppose it?
Good question. So, I'm good on the, thank you. So, one of the things that President Trump keep speaking about is the desire to have an infrastructure package upward of $1 trillion. By my way of thinking, the proposal itself has been pretty opaque in terms of where the revenue stream comes from, as well as what the term infrastructure means. Because let's think about it. Infrastructure isn't just roads and bridges. It's rural broadband and spectrum. It's increasing our ability to do clean energy projects around the country. If you look particularly at our ability to use more clean energy sources, one of the things that holds us back is actually the fact that the infrastructure isn't in place in order to utilize those resources. So we need to first figure out what the term infrastructure is going to mean and how it's going to be defined within the Trump administration's proposal. We're going to need to hear what the proposal is, and we're going to also need to hear how is it going to be funded. One piece that you will always hear is the term repatriation, which is we have a lot of American companies, multinational companies that are American companies that have their foreign earnings held overseas, and they don't bring those profits back to America because it's going to get taxed at an additional 30-35%. If we were to lower, a one-time lowering or entirely, that tax rate to say 10%, you could see upwards of $500 billion in additional revenue, but that would be one-time revenue. So to Ms. Longo, to answer your question, I think that it does have to be paid for, but with this caveat, if the Trump administration were to lay out a proposal that I felt was going to be immediately ready for infrastructure, like shovel ready, and I know that term has been, we've heard about that term during the Obama administration and the stimulus package. If we were to borrow that money, I would first look skeptically at that, but I would have to know that that money was going to get out right away, and I would want to know what the projects are. And specific to our region, a top 10 infrastructure project in the country is Route 95, I-95. That's a $2 billion project to rehab that in Philadelphia. The other big infrastructure project that we need to focus on here in the Northeast is the Northeast Amtrak corridor, and which is not, by the way, just from Washington, D.C. to Massachusetts. Amtrak actually has a lot of the lines that run east to west across Pennsylvania that SEPTA then leases. And not all of us use passenger rail every day, but if we don't have passenger rail, the economy in the Mid-Atlantic region in the Northeast would really grind to a halt. About 20% of the nation's GDP is in the Northeast corridor. And so I think it's very important that we do invest in infrastructure. Thank you for the question.
Next is Shannon Brown from East Vincent Township.
I was born and raised in East Vincent Township. You don't have any stories about me when I was a kid, do you?
I think I'm older than you. Like many people, I am concerned about the Russia thing, and we want to know if you support and will actually demand an independent investigation into the meddling for our election process.
Everybody thinks you asked a good question. Right now, you have a House Intelligence Committee looking into that issue, and you have a Senate Intelligence Committee looking into that issue. Obviously, Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, recused himself. There was some controversy. There was some controversy over certain decisions that he made intermittently within that investigation. You've also seen a lot of folks now focus on that Senate Intelligence Committee. Here's what I think. At this moment in time, I don't believe we need an independent commission for the following reason. No. For the following reason. I think you need to allow the House Intelligence Committee to issue its findings, the Senate Intelligence Committee to issue its findings. If the Republicans issue one set of findings and the Democrats disagree, they can issue their own report. At that point in time, when you see House and Senate, Republican and Democrat, issue their findings, if there is disparity there that warrants further investigation, then I think your question becomes very ripe for consideration. But what if we get through this process and we have the House Republicans and Democrats, Senate Republicans and Democrats all find unanimity in terms of their findings? So until we're able to allow that process to unfold, I don't think it's ripe for consideration. But I also think that the question itself, in me answering it, doesn't mean that that's my final answer. I just think that we're at a particular moment in time where that's my belief.
Next is Rob Seeley, also of East Vincent.
I'm going to need another Bob.
Rob Seeley, also East Vincent. That was my wife. My question is, what is your position on the southern border wall? I'm against it just for a few reasons.
There's a lot of reasons there.
I'll go very quickly. $25 billion I think we could spend on things for Pennsylvania. I think they say most of the immigration comes from visa overstays, so people flying over are the people who are immigrating. I've read that we've had the smallest amount of immigration since the 1990s, the fewest border apprehensions since 1973. If we make Mexico pay for it, it'll be a trade war, increasing the cost of goods everywhere. And we already spend $3.8 billion per year. Plus, I think it's kind of racist in the sense that we're not building a northern wall, we're building a southern wall.
Okay, thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Yep, easy. So the question is a good question. I get asked it. There you go. Thanks. So President Trump uses the term "build a wall." I've been unclear on whether that means physically the entire southern border you build a wall, or certain parts you build a wall, and other parts you have surveillance or other types of means of securing the border. If you ask my colleague Will Hurd, who is a second-term member of Congress from Texas, the member of Congress that has the longest stretch of the border, he will say that if you were to literally build a wall along the entire southern border, it would be the most costly, ineffective way of actually securing the border. I know him. I value his opinion greatly. And so as I stand before you here today, my feeling, based upon what I know, is that building a physical wall along the entire southern border is not the best way of enforcing the border. That does not mean there's not parts that may have a border wall, but that doesn't mean all parts.
Now, the next
I don't know, because we haven't seen it. Well, first off, it's something that I would vote on, and second, I haven't seen a proposal from the administration as to how it would be paid for.
Would you vote for it?
I would have to see. The question was, would I vote for it? I would have to see what the proposal is, what it would cost, and whether it would actually be an effective way of securing the border. So it's difficult for me to answer that question in the abstract.
Let me give you the next question. This person didn't put their name on it, but I think it's an important question. Congressman, would you vote to authorize use of force in Syria beyond this one-time strike on the airfield?
Yeah. So that's a really good question, and a couple things, because I think it's very important that all of you hopefully can develop an appreciation for how I view my job. Doesn't mean you have to agree with me, doesn't mean you have to support me, but hopefully you'll gain an understanding as to how I sift through very complex issues. Tonight, when I leave here, I will go read a 92-page report from the Congressional Research Service, which all of you can read as well if you'd like. I'll pull it out in a second. And the question here is, at what point in time does the executive branch need to go to Congress to request authorization to go to war? Now, I don't view the airstrike that we engaged in 2 days ago as requiring authorization from Congress. But I do think that as the President lays out a comprehensive strategy on what he would like to see done, if he'd like to see anything done, by our country in response to the Syrian civil war, that he needs to explain what that is, what kind of troop engagement that might be, what the end goal is, and until I saw all that and felt comfortable with it, I would not be prepared in any way to vote for an AUMF. Let me also say this, and we had to go back and check my statements, my public statements, because sometimes you think things, but you don't always publicly push them out there. My feeling during the 2 years that I served when President Obama was still serving was that we were teetering very closely to needing an AUMF in order to stay engaged in Syria and actually some of our other military operations in the Middle East. But it gets very opaque very quickly, right? I just feel we're at a moment in time where, given where the Syrian conflict is and all the other participants in Syria, I mean, I looked in the newspaper today, anytime you talk about military involvement by the United States, you have to ask, just as it relates to Syria, okay, what does Turkey think? What does Israel think? What does Saudi Arabia think? How's it going to impact Iran? What about Iraq? I mean, and this is just in the immediately surrounding area, to say nothing of, is our military ready to go in? What is our commitment? What is our clear, achievable end goal? In my first term, I served on the Veterans Affairs Committee. My feeling as it relates to military operations and going to war is as follows. I think when we talk about what it costs to go to war, that a lot of times we don't really think about what the real human cost is decades from now for people who have served. And so I think that that's another element that needs to be thought about in this. And the final thing I would say about Syria at this moment in time is we need to ask ourselves even if there is anything that we could do militarily to solve that situation. And if there was something to be done, would it really just be us, or would it be a multilateral effort? So there's a whole host of complexities to this, and the reason why I said the answer is no at this moment in time is I just think there are way, way more questions than answers in terms of what involvement, if any, we may have moving forward. Having said that, I can assure you that everybody in this room agrees that the use of chemical weapons against anybody, let alone against a nation's own children, or anybody in a country, is, that's a line in the sand. And in fact, I was doing a little research this morning. If you look, back in September of 2013, the U.S. and Russia agree on a deal to destroy Syria's stockpile of chemical weapons. And then in October 2013, Syria officially joins the Chemical Weapons Convention, vowing to relinquish its chemical arsenal to avert the threat of U.S. military action. That's over 3.5 years ago, and they still purportedly are the ones that have chemical weapons and that use them. So there's also some enforcement issues here, I think, be it through the UN and through the international community, that we have to shore up as it relates to what's going on in Syria and enforcing those provisions. That was a long answer. I apologize.
Well, that's going to be a question that's going to come up. So
Okay.
it's in the pile here, I promise. Next is David Akers from Audubon.
We all know another David Akers.
Not me. He's left-footed, I'm right-footed.
There you go.
It's the only difference. So I think you're doing a great job of trying to convince us that you're an independent thinker and you're not just going to go along with whatever the president suggests. I've got a lot of concerns about his skinny budget.
Me too.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. I've got concerns about the EPA being funded adequately, the Park District, but my main concern up here today is to talk to you about funding foreign assistance.
Yeah.
There's a proposal to increase the defense budget by $50 billion and to cut foreign assistance, and to me that's backwards.
Yeah. That sure can. So the question was that Mr. Akers has a lot of concerns, to use the generous term, over the president's skinny budget, and that chief among his objections is the proposal to reduce or eliminate foreign assistance, which is essentially State Department money for diplomatic purposes, while simultaneously plussing up the military budget. And actually, if you look at a lot of what many Republican senators say, I think probably most all Democratic senators, but don't quote me on that, although I guess you can because I just said it, that is a cost saver, right? So you always have to look when you're viewing taxpayer spending of dollars, the cost avoidance of investing in things now rather than later. And for those of you who have ever had someone with a drug addiction, I think that's a great example of where if you don't get treatment right away, what that could mean further on down the line from a mental health perspective, incarceration perspective, job prospects perspective. So let's take that let's take that and metaphorically apply that to how we spend dollars to provide stability around the world, because we are the preeminent superpower in the entire world, and part of what I think we do philosophically is try and spread peace through strength. Part of that involves maintaining strong diplomatic ties with a lot of countries. So if you eliminate that foreign assistance, you could very well be undermining some of the objectives in providing stability. I don't think, as I stand here today, that the president's skinny budget has any chance of passing the House of Representatives. So just as, I have to be fair, President Obama's proposed budgets never had any chance of passing, because that is just a president's sort of moment in time where they lay out their priorities, or if they want to achieve a particular balancing of a budget, or if they want to lay out long-term priorities. That's really more of a statement of policies, or it can be a statement of policies. So as we go through the budgeting process, I will be looking at things that I think are of extreme value to our region and our country. I pointed out several that I take issue with. I don't think we should be reducing NIH funding by $1.5 million. And there are some I think some very valuable educational programs for socioeconomically disadvantaged students that I think are worth saving. There's a lot. So I'm not terribly concerned that the president's skinny budget has any likelihood of ever being implemented.
Yes, sir.
Stripping of the State Department is also concerned in the same vein.
And we'll get
Yeah.
to that question too. So next up is
You got come in here so that when.
next up is Arlene Talley of Berwyn.
Thank you.
How about that T-shirt?
And my sweatshirt says the Women's March. So, in Washington, I'm really concerned about the environment. Extremely. I have a 7-year-old grandson. I want him to have a world. You have kids. Do you think that we should withdraw from the International Climate Change Agreement?
Good question. So, a couple things. As I stand here, I am leaning in favor of saying that I don't feel that we should leave the Paris Climate Accord for a couple reasons. Not the least of which, by the way, is if you look at where we are from a clean energy perspective and how we're reducing carbon emissions, most of the benchmarks in there we're going to achieve anyway. So why should we have other countries not go about achieving their benchmarks when we're going to achieve our benchmarks? Couple other things on the environmental side. I voted against the House Republican Interior Appropriations Bill my first term in Congress for what I found to be cuts to certain environmental programs that I didn't agree with. I am on record as supporting the permanent reauthorization of the Land and Water Conservation Fund and fully spending the authorized amount. And I think that there was a bill last Congress that I helped pass the Delaware River Basin Commission Act, which will allow our local watershed organizations access to more grant money. I mean, if you look at Green Valleys Association and some of the other watershed organizations, if they have the ability to flex their dollars and leverage them with federal dollars, we're going to see more in the way of stream buffer, riparian corridor buffer, programs and restorations in our communities. So I will always be looking out for our environment.
Next is Jeffrey McFall.
As Jeffrey comes down, I have to say, Jeffrey, a couple months ago, was coming to my office quite regularly, and I was always in Washington, D.C. I spent the first 7 weeks in Washington, D.C., 4 days a week, but they kept saying this gentleman, Jeffrey McFalls, kept coming to the office, so it's nice to finally meet you.
Pleasure to meet you, Congressman.
So stand right here. And
all right. Simple question, but I have a couple of points I wanted to make that led me to my question. Healthcare obviously is very important for everybody, hot topic these days. I wanted to just run through some of the numbers of the executives at our biggest healthcare companies out there. Humana, their CEO, Bruce Broussard, last year took home $19.7 million in total compensation. Chief Operating Officer, $6.7 million. He gets to retire this March. That's great. Brian Kane, their Chief Financial Officer, $4.7 million. Their stock price since the ACA was signed in 2010 is up 400%. 11 executives in February of 2017 sold their stock for $74 million worth of profit. Cigna, another major healthcare company, $49 million of total compensation for their CEO, David Cordani, $4.9 million for another executive, $4.4 million, so on and so forth. Aetna, this is my favorite one because you and our Senator Toomey on the other side of Congress likes to quote Mr. Bertolini, who took home $28 million last year in total compensation. He's the one that gets all the press for saying that the ACA is in a death spiral. I guess my question is, these guys, all their companies' stock is up at least 400% in the last 6 to 7 years since the ACA was signed. They tell us that it's in a death spiral because they can't afford to stay in these markets. What I see, and this is SEC material that they are submitting, they're doing awesome. I don't understand. So anyways.
That's the most popular statement yet. So
those guys are doing great. Their companies are doing great. So what we hear, though, is that they cannot stay in the individual markets because they are losing so much money. Again, stock prices are through the roof. These guys are making a pile full of money. So with all that being said, let's see here. Kaiser Family Foundation finds that 64% of our population favors Medicare for all, single payer, universal health care, whatever you want to call it. And a Gallup poll finds that 58% of Americans favor the same. So my question to you, Congressman, if a majority of Pennsylvania's 6th district that is here today, if your majority of constituents in our district favor Medicare for all, or whatever you want to call it, would you be in support of such a bill? Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you for your question, Jeff. So I think there's multiple things I want to touch on here. So make sure I hit them. One is the ACA exchanges. Two is, I think two is single payer, right? Yes. Most of you are for single payer? Yes. And three is Medicare for all. Okay. All right. Okay.
We can explain to you what it means. Anytime.
The Affordable Care Act exchanges is about 8% of the health insurance marketplace. About half the population is in employer-sponsored plans. 20 to 25% of the population has Medicaid. Some are uninsured, some are on Medicare. So when we talk about the ACA exchanges, we're talking about 8% of the population, which doesn't make it any less important. It's just important that when we talk about statements that the ACA exchanges are imploding, that doesn't mean our entire healthcare system is imploding, although it has a lot of challenges. It means that particular marketplace. And my feeling is, in order to address what are going to be continued double-digit increases in the ACA exchanges, you're going to have to make sure that you have more than one insurance provider offering coverage in that marketplace. And that's on a county-by-county basis across the country. Right now, 1/3 of all counties in the country only have one insurance option in the ACA exchanges. Next year...
But it's a small percentage of the population in those 30 counties.
Single payer eliminates that. Single payer eliminates.
Okay, let them finish.
Let them finish, please.
So next year, that'll be close to 50%. And in fact, in Chester County and Montgomery County, just one insurer in the ACA exchanges. The way to address that, by my way of thinking, is to make sure that you have more than one option there. And so I think the way you have to do that is to allow what are termed association plans, which is if you are a small employer that's not subject to the employer mandate, can you go like they do sort of in the Midwest through the Farm Bureau, through your local Chamber of Commerce, so that you have a larger pool from which to go to an insurance company, and by doing that, you will have more economies of scale. They'll be able to evaluate risk better. You'll have more insurance companies wanting to offer policies. If you go in the other direction and allow that to essentially implode, what you'll end up with, in my estimation, is a slow march towards single payer. Because you're only going to have one insurer that... Because you'll only have one insurance provider. All your providers will essentially be subject to dealing with just one insurance provider. You're not going to have choice. You're not going to have competition. Your ability to reduce the cost of care is going to be very, very difficult because there's no choice in the marketplace. Now, as to the I'm doing my best here to answer questions, but if someone has a follow-up question, I would encourage you to write down it all.
There are follow-up questions.
Yeah. So I don't think that single payer is the appropriate form of a healthcare system for our country.
All right, there'll be more follow-ups on that, but for right now, Gary Robbenheimer.
Why is cancer care for-profit acceptable in this country when we're the only industrialized nation in the world to profitize?
Okay, we're going to come back. We're going to come back to this.
Just come on in.
Okay, I'm a recent immigrant to the USA, as everybody around here is. So here's my question. How do you morally justify banning all Syrian refugees, but condone bombing in Syria when atrocities are carried out against the Syrian people? Thank you.
Good question. I don't.
All right, next is Robert Bruckman. Okay.
How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Here you go.
So maybe it works.
Oh, that's so it picks it up so so people watching online will be able to see it.
It's a statement basically followed by a question. On behalf of myself and the No More Labels Party, I want to thank you for your service on the Problem Solvers Caucus.
Thank you.
And I encourage your continued involvement and support of bipartisan legislation with your opposition to the repeal of the ACA and to the enactment of the AHCA. Do you plan to continue that? You had stated after it was removed from consideration that
Right.
you would vote against it.
Right.
Do you still intend to vote against
Yeah,
it?
good question. So let's talk about healthcare reform and what my opinions are. A couple things. There was a Daily Local news article last weekend that sort of laid out my thinking throughout the week that the healthcare reform bill was on the floor. I think it was a pretty accurate representation of where I was on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I also did a C-SPAN interview that sort of lays out some of my thinking on healthcare reform. If you go to cspan.org, you'll see it there as well. I think that there are a couple things about healthcare reform that we have to get right. If you look at some of the protections contained in the ACA, particularly protecting pre-existing conditions so that you always have access to health care, and if a condition is discovered, an insurance company just can't mark you up as a consequence of that. I think protecting against that is extremely important within our health care system. I think children on your parents' plan until you're 26 is something everybody agrees with. I think that the essential health benefits are extremely important. And right now, this directly addresses the gentleman's question. Right now, there are some who want to basically eliminate or allow a state, no, it would be eliminate, I just read the amendment, eliminate the mandatory essential health benefits coverage, allow a state to eliminate that coverage, and you would do that through the state, through a waiver program. I have to look at that a lot closer, but I have concerns about that. I think that's problematic on a number of levels. When you're talking about healthcare policy, you really, and look, if a lot of you folks are for single payer, this isn't a question you have to worry about if that's your position, but I don't think that that's the right healthcare system. And so therefore, if I want to go about making reforms, what do I feel about essential health benefits? I think that they're an integral part of the healthcare system, and if you're going to allow a state to do a waiver program, I would have to look very, very closely at that. And just throwing money at something to say, well, we're going to get rid of something, but here's a pot of money in order to reduce premiums, that doesn't carry the day for me, and I will add to you this further consideration. When you look at the ACA subsidies that enable a lot of Americans to have health care coverage that they otherwise wouldn't be able to afford, the health care reform package instead offers advanceable tax credits. What's that difference mean? Well, so if you look at the advanceable tax credits, to me the question is, okay, that means that you have the immediate ability to purchase insurance even if you don't have those dollars in your bank account. And listen, let's be honest, there are a lot of Americans at the beginning of the year are not going to have those dollars in their bank account. So it becomes a critical question on, okay, advanceable tax credit. You're going to replace a subsidy with an advanceable tax credit. So if you are an American, 55 years old, making $26,000 a year, is that, and you're going to replace a subsidy with an advanceable tax credit, is that advanceable tax credit sufficient to actually enable you the purchasing health insurance coverage? And so, consequently, if the answer to that question is no, then you haven't solved a problem, you've created one. And so from my perspective, if you're going to shift from a subsidy to an advanceable tax credit to allow people the option to go in the marketplace and choose what plan they want, you need to make sure that advanceable tax credit is sufficient to have, and here's the third point to the gentleman's question. I think any health care reform bill that I would vote for has to answer yes to the following question. Does this health care reform bill ensure affordable access to health care coverage for every American? I think that So if you're going to replace the Affordable Care Act, you need to make sure that you have that as a principle that a reform package would have included in it. And so how will I vote in the future? The short answer is I don't know, because if you go back and read that Daily Local article, Monday was a bill. The next day there was a proposal to do something else to it. By Wednesday there was an additional proposal, and then by Thursday they were stripping some things out of it, and then by Friday there was something else in there, and then they decided to pull the bill. So if I say yes or no to something on a Monday and then it changes on Tuesday, well, what if it changed for the better or worse? So you have to allow the legislative process to unfold, particularly on something this complicated, for me to discern what my ultimate answer would be. That's just how I think. It's just how I do things.
We'll be watching closely.
We have another question on the ACA, which is Lanny Frank.
Could you clarify your response to the Syrian question, please? You did a flippant answer there. Yes.
What do you want me to answer the?
Why don't we do this one first?
Come on in here, Lonnie.
Why don't you answer his question first? And
Well, go ahead.
Well, I thought you had a question. A good member of the local Chester County Democratic Committee, who visited my office last week, right?
Right.
Yes, my
Only
staff
for
says.
the second
my
time,
staff says-
although your staff seems to think that I'm there every day, which it would be my right to be there every day, wouldn't it?
Yeah, people are allowed to come visit the office, yeah.
Okay. My question is, do you know that repealing the ACA would defund hospitals and limit access to vital prescription drugs that would stem the opioid epidemic? And would you vote for any repeal and replace legislation that would limit any opioid treatment?
Okay. So my feeling, and it's been this way all along, is repealing the Affordable Care Act without a replacement that sufficiently addresses my objectives in healthcare reform is a step backwards. Repealing something without a replacement is making a situation worse. Then the other question on opioid treatment is we voted for a bill to plus up spending on opioid abuse, so that's what I would like to see continue. I do think, and I did say one or two positive things about the skinny budget. One was I believe that there was an additional $500 million in opioid money. I would also say that I was part of a hearing on the committee that I serve on 2 weeks ago on fentanyl. That's the next iteration of this. That's actually killing more people right now than anything else in our local communities, and we need to come up with a response to stop that stuff from coming in from China. I think you're going to see. I think I just submitted an op-ed on that, which sort of lays out my concerns and what I think we need to do from a policy-making perspective there.
Defunding hospitals has that side effect.
All right, next up is John Stanger. All right, do you want to comment?
Yeah, so I guess the follow-up, the question was, yeah, which I said, I thought I was very clear. It's hard for me to. What's my policy? I can't. So, okay, so the question was, what's my additional perspective on Syrian refugees? And let's even, whether you want to broaden it or specify it more, what is America's role in our world in terms of being a provider of humanitarian assistance? Okay, so some people are saying yes, some people are saying no. The United States of America actually provides more dollars in the way of humanitarian assistance than all other countries combined. And so I think that we should continue with that. So if you look at the Syrian civil war and have a feeling that those who are living in Syria who are refugees should return to their homeland upon the end of the civil war, it seems to me that the refugee camps in and around Syria, while not ideal, no situation is ideal for a refugee is where most refugees are going right now. I think we should continue with our financial commitment. I've also said from a Syrian refugee perspective that we just need to make sure that our vetting is sufficient to make sure that those refugees coming here.
Are you in favor of allowing Syrian refugees in?
I said yes.
All right, now we move on. John Stanger from Phoenixville.
Great, thanks. Hi, Congressman.
How are you?
Good. My question is, are you in favor of term limits? And if no, why no? And if yes, what are you doing to advance that cause?
Okay, good question. So my position on term limits is I'm not opposed to term limits. I think that you need to make sure that any elected official who's serving, particularly in an institution as complicated with as much going on as Congress, is there long enough to understand the various issues, understands how the system works so that they can actually work their way up into a committee, develop subject matter expertise, and actually implement stuff to improve our country. So, if you don't do that, so if it's a 2 or 3 term type term limit, you know who runs the place down there? Staff. Well, all the people you just said and staff. So by my way of thinking, there is a lot less accountability in our democracy if those term limits are too narrow of a window. Now, if somebody wants to say you should be limited to 6 terms in Congress, okay, fine.
Next is Eileen McVetti of Downingtown.
Hello.
So next weekend, I'll be participating in a tax day march in Philadelphia. House Democrats are starting a discharge petition that would bring a bill requiring the president to disclose his tax returns.
I like that one too.
Will you sign on?
That was a very popular question. I think the president should disclose his taxes. I haven't seen even what the bill says, but I think you're going to have an issue of making a law retroactive in terms of compliance. So.
All right, next up is Sandy Carter from East Goshen.
Hey, you came in to visit, right?
Yes. First of all, thank you for your support of research funding, specifically NIH and MSCD MRP. As a proponent of research funding, what do you believe is going to happen with research funding in light of the new president's budget blueprint?
Good question. I don't think that this Congress is going to pass a budget that would reduce investment in medical research, be it through NIH. I just think that if you look at the NIH program, look, here's the challenge, and I spend a fair amount of time on the issue of rare disease. And if you look at the number of rare diseases and how, number one, it's so deeply personal and difficult as a parent to see your child with a rare disease. It's a struggle to realize that there's not a way to find a cure for that particular rare disease. And if you look at the biopharmaceutical industry, we live in a capitalist society. And so the capital deployment decisions are going to be based on return on investment. And a return on investment for a rare disease is going to mean a lot of capital never finds its way into the marketplace to do the research to help find those cures. And that's why NIH becomes so important, and that's why the public investment in medical research becomes so critical. And as a consequence, we actually voted last Congress to increase the NIH budget. And so it seems to me, if members of Congress just voted last Congress to increase support for NIH, what we shouldn't do this Congress is decrease that commitment. So that's where I stand on the issue. A couple other things that I would ask you all to look at, and if you see articles that you want to forward to me, please do this. Alzheimer's is going to be a tremendous cost driver on our healthcare system. And the claps in that case, I think, are you want to see more investment in Alzheimer's. It's not that, So if you're, I know what you're saying when you want Trump's tax returns and other. I mean, I get where you're going with this. It's going to be a tremendous cost driver in our healthcare system. And you have a lot of phase 3 trials going on right now that may not eliminate Alzheimer's, but I'm 40 years old. As you get into your 40s, you can do the sort of brain studies that enable you to determine whether Alzheimer's, you may be headed in that direction. And then there is another set of drugs that is in clinical trials to slow the progressivity of that disease. And if you further look at what the cost drivers are for those that have Alzheimer's, even your ability to delay the progressivity of that 5, 10, 15 years has a tremendous cost savings. To say nothing, and I don't mean to sound like an accountant because I sure as heck am not, to say nothing of just the human experience and connection that people have with loved ones that much longer in their life. You can say the same, I would also say, in terms of autism research and some of the strides that we have to make there. So we have our rare disease issues. MS is another one, not a rare disease. Diabetes. So we have to continue to invest and encourage innovation in that space. That's how we're going to improve public health outcomes in our country. And I think we all agree that improving public health outcomes in our country, and candidly around the globe, and remaining a country that is a leader in medical innovation, I think we want to be proud to have our country be a pioneer in that space.
Next is Phil Degg of Downingtown.
Phil Degg, a good borough council member in Downingtown, right?
Yes, sir. Good to see you. Thanks for coming out today.
Look at that pin.
Resist. President Trump's budget plans call for the elimination of community block grants.
Yeah.
His budget director sees no return on investment. I would love to take him on a tour of Chester County to prove him wrong.
Me too.
Such cuts would be devastating, particularly to those people in Chester County who need it the most. Can we count on you, Representative Costello, to really go to bat for us and keep those grants in place?
Good question. Thank you. Yeah, so if you look at community development block grants, CDBG grants, I used to be a county commissioner for 4 years. We get tremendous value out of our CDBG dollars. It helps a lot of our more urban municipalities, or the city of Coatesville, and I think it's 17 boroughs in Chester County. Now, as you're probably aware, I have 45% of the congressional district I represent, which probably means we should get to a gerrymandering question too, right? Chester County, 23% of my district is Western Montgomery, 23% is Berks, and then I have about 8% of my district is Lebanon County. So there's a lot of those communities too, where you can take CDBG dollars and leverage it for streetscapes, for helping the homeless shelter put a new roof up. It's endless. Actually, I believe CDBG money was it's been utilized here in the borough of Westchester for a number of things. So yeah, I think that those are tremendous programs. And here's the other thing to remember. we are very fortunate to live in a collection of communities that not only is very responsible, but very value added on federal and state grants that we get. And so we should make sure that we're fighting for our fair share. Look, it's our taxpayer dollars that go to Washington. We should make sure that we're fighting for our fair share of those dollars back, because between a robust tax base at the county level, a tremendous volunteer network, great providers in the nonprofit space, as well as the private sector space, we can value add with our CDBG dollars, and we should do that. And I will fight to protect CDBG funding in a budget.
Up next is Ethan Norris, and right after that will be Jessica Weingarten.
My question has to do with the tax reform plan, and I say that in quote marks, that we have heard a great deal about, but as far as I know, very little about. If you have, I hope, more information than I do about its content, I would like to know what your position is on it.
Yeah. So you're right that it's vague, because the Ways and Means Committee, which is the tax writing committee in the House, hasn't put out what the specific bill would be. The desire is to reduce tax rates, to simplify the tax code, to get rid of a lot of the special interest deductions and exemptions, maintain the home mortgage interest deduction, maintain the charitable deduction, and then you do hear discussion on a border adjustment tax, which is very complicated and which impacts a lot of industries and a lot of companies' business models very differently. And so I don't have a position on tax reform other than I would like to see our tax code simplified. I would like to see more dollars returned to each of our respective pocketbooks. I do think, look, we have almost a $20 trillion deficit, and we've talked about the president's skinny budget, and we run anywhere between $500 billion and $1 trillion deficit spending every single year. The interest on that debt, we have relatively speaking, a fairly low interest rate there. As that interest rate increases, that debt's going to become more costly. That's debt that our children are going to pay and our grandchildren. I think we do have a responsibility to get ourselves to a balanced budget. It's literally not possible to cut your way to a balanced budget. You need to grow your way to a balanced budget. We're growing at about 1.8% GDP growth. You need to get up into 3.5% GDP growth. There are a lot of policy and regulatory issues, I think, that need to be addressed in order to get growth there. But here's the one sort of mathematical metric that I want you to take with you today. If you, for every 1/10 of a percentage point GDP growth that you average over a 10-year period of time, that's another $500 billion in revenue. So if you're growing at 3% instead of 2%, 5, 6, anywhere between $5 and $10 trillion additional revenue to the federal government. That's how you get to a balanced, you start balancing off your revenue with your expenditures. There are a lot of things that go into that. And I shifted, I think, from tax reform to debt. I didn't really mean to do that, other than to illustrate that some of that, I think, does come about through tax reform, simplifying our tax code, deploying more capital in investment in, we have wage stagnation, we want to lift wages. We want to make sure companies are reinvesting back in their business, hiring more, plant expansion.
Do you support raising the minimum wage?
Why don't you ask that question? I'll answer it.
Okay. Well, let me get one next, because I said Jessica Weingarten would be up next.
And then you'll get to minimum.
And then we'll get to minimum wage.
That'll be a relief for you. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm sure this isn't like...
I enjoy this stuff.
You're liking it?
I do. I like it.
Okay. And It's brave. And I apologize, this isn't really my question. I've called your office twice, and I recorded the call, so I did call. I've sent you notes, and I've asked this question. I've never gotten a response.
When
And
did you call for a response? Because we usually.
a couple weeks ago, a month ago, and I've sent in a note through your website in January, February, and March.
Okay.
So, but it's okay. And I love your tie. It's my favorite. Look, it matches. It's my favorite color.
Boscov's.
Yeah, hot pop pink. Okay.
Oh, it matches
And
your. That's
it
right.
does. It's
match
the
your
exact
name.
same thing. And I apologize because I lack filters. So this is going to be a healthcare question.
Okay.
And when you were answering Jeff's question,
Yeah.
single payer doesn't mean that there's one healthcare insurance company. It means that the government provides healthcare as administered by an insurance company in the same way that most of the Blues administer Medicare at a far lower cost. That's number one. Number two, when you answered his question, you talked about the importance of access and how those tax offsets would be the same as the underwrites, and they're not. They're very, very different things. As someone who has a disease, who takes medication, when I have insurance, and if I get it through the ACA, it costs me $35 a month. If I don't have that, and because I generally do contract work, I don't always have that, it's a minimum of $780 a month for that medication, which I can't afford. And since I have followed your career since you were in East Vincent, and then you were a Register of Deeds, and then you were a supervisor for the county. I've always known you to be an honorable person, and you understand certainly that your job as congressman is to represent the needs of your constituency and what they want you to do. And a lot of the people here, a lot of people in your district want you to come out and commit to the idea of protecting the health care, not access, as you said, but actually to be able to get health care coverage.
Right.
At some Come on. I still have the question. So here's my question, and you and I are going to be eye to eye on this, and it's a yes or no question.
Okay.
If you go and you vote to take away the community rating, the idea of underwrites, and the Republicans did sue so that a lot of the money doesn't flow to the insurance companies.
The risk orders,
Yeah, all that sort of stuff because of what happened under John Boehner. And so, Boehner, excuse me. So, sorry. So my question is, when you vote for that, if that gets enacted, once it does, between 10 and 21 days later, I will be dead. And I'd like to know if you're going to come to my funeral.
Oh.
It's a yes or no.
I sort of laid out my priorities for healthcare reform. The one point that you made that maybe I should expound on a little bit is you were speaking to the protections in the Affordable Care Act. And so I tried to lay out some of the protections, the EHBs, the pre-existing conditions coverage. The one I should add to that would be community rating. I think that I have deep concerns about getting rid of community rating. I think that's a dangerous path. And no, I want to come to your birthday.
Well, our next question, and this will have to be the final question for this afternoon, is Janet Yeager from Chester Springs.
What time is it? Bill, what time is it?
It is 5 minutes of 4.
A couple more. I'll get to minimum wage. I'm not here to not answer a question that you ask. Hi.
Hi. You have mentioned in your town halls prior that you are not in favor of gerrymandering. Here's your question.
Yeah.
To support re-election. Would you be willing to make a public statement in support of reforming Pennsylvania redistricting to be done by a nonpartisan independent committee? Why or why not?
Okay. let's talk about gerrymandering and Supreme Court cases and the fact that it's an inherently political process and there's literally no way to get rid of the politics. So if you set up an independent commission, who is the independent commission? Well, the governor's going to get an appointment, the Senate Majority Leader's going to get an appointment, the Speaker's going to get an appointment, and ultimately you're going to end up with one party having more say. Well, let me finish. I'm just going to finish my answer here. I think you end up with one party having more say over who's on that commission than not. Here's what I think when it comes to redistricting reform. The single most egregious thing as it relates to gerrymandering, from my perspective, is the lack of compactness in a lot of these districts. So if you look at a district and you see it carved in such a way, and I think that there's probably a way to use algorithms or computer models, and I think there are actually, because you can see districts that have a gerrymandering score, right? Mine isn't, it's not really a shape, right? I think you need to have compactness, because I think when you're talking about representing school districts, representing municipalities, candidly just getting around the district, understanding what nonprofit organizations make your community work, having employers, because look, a lot of employers around here have employees that live in the district. If you think that I like driving through 2 other districts to get back in my district, like how does that, I'd rather have everybody close. Less driving. So I'm all for redistricting reform where you take that issue of compactness. But here's something else to remember. We have a lot more we have 750 to 1 million more Democrats in Pennsylvania than Republicans. There's more Republicans in Congress than Democrats. Why is that? Because in 2012, you're on to something. So you have a couple things happening there. You have densely populated areas in the counties of Philadelphia and Allegheny with a lot of Democrats, and then you have the suburbs, which are purplish. And I imagine a lot of you would want them to be blue, right? Yeah. Go ahead. So my point here is this. If you look at the suburban Philadelphia congressional districts, they're all purple districts. So if you were to redistrict the Philly suburbs, you'd probably end up with party registration similar to what they are now. They might be tweaked a little bit, but they're still, no. Hear what I'm saying. They might be tweaked a little bit in terms of party registration, but they're still somewhere from a party registration perspective where they are now. Having said all that, redistricting reform, compactness, that's what I support. This is, and just so everyone's clear, I don't have a say on this. Right? This is, and I do speak up on a lot of things. This is a state legislative issue. And so have your state reps on bills that support what you want to see.
They're also in gerrymandered districts.
All right, if Congressman, there was
a go for a couple more.
Okay, all right. There was a question about the federal minimum wage and whether to increase it. What are your feelings on that?
I think first off, a couple things. One, government mandated. I support an increase in a federal minimum wage. You have to look at the score on that to make sure you're not losing jobs. So I believe if you looked at President Obama's $10.10 increase, what you saw was somewhere between 50,000 to 1 million jobs lost as a consequence of that. And no, that's what it was.
That's the Heritage Foundation.
No, I don't think it was a Heritage. I think it was a government.
All right, let him finish.
I think it was the Obama administration's score on that. But my point is that I think that you should have an increase in the minimum wage if you really want wage growth and you really want to rid ourselves of wage stagnation. You need economic growth. That's really what's going to lift wages. And so that would be my sense. I'm sure. Who here supports a $15 minimum wage? Okay, most people here. Is that fair representation? All right. Half? And the other thing to bear in mind is that moment in time where some of those minimum wage jobs you have employers choose automation over employees. So that's the other thing. So that's the other thing you have to look at. Look, I want everybody to do better. I'm with you. As a policymaker, you have to look at what you think is best from an economic growth perspective. And so I support a minimum wage increase. I just laid out that I do. I just want to make sure that when you score it, that you're not going to see a tremendous amount of job loss. That's my position.
Okay, we've got time for 2 more questions. Barbara Kroll of Westchester.
Come on in here, Barbara.
Hi. What role do you feel the federal government is responsible for and should in regulations, other than the military? What is their real responsibility?
Well, the federal government does a lot.
So what should they regulate?
Yeah, well, they should regulate our air, our water, our transportation safety, the safety of our pharmaceutical drugs, our food, making sure that our civil rights and our liberties are protected, making sure somebody said voting rights, our financial system. Let's have it out. What else? Our education. And I think on education, probably we are better off with a system where our state board of education and our local school districts have more say over curriculum, student testing, teacher evaluation. But on the issue of making sure that everybody's, because look, particularly in the special education area, you can't allow one state to treat special ed students one way and another state. So there are some benchmarks even there where our federal government plays a very critical role. I've said that time and again, actually, yeah. Yeah, let's talk about internet privacy.
Go ahead. There was a question in here, so go ahead.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of, particularly if you go on the internet, about the CRA, or the Congressional Review Act vote on the issue of privacy. So if you look at what's known as the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Trade Commission has historically always been that federal consumer protection agency that makes sure that your privacy rights are protected. They've had 15 enforcement actions against internet companies in the past several years in directly that space. In the waning days of the Obama administration, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, which does not have any enforcement authority over privacy, out came a rule that the FCC was going to take over enforcement of privacy protections from the FTC. The FCC has subsequently said this should go, and it happened within the last month or two, enforcement of privacy protection for consumers should be with the FTC, not the FCC. That's my position as well. That's why I voted the way that I did. But having said all that, I think that intermittently, until we restore jurisdiction to the FTC, the FCC should make sure that certain privacy protections are included. I would also say this final point for those who have concerns about the privacy vote. Absolutely nothing has changed from the way privacy rights were protected a year ago or 5 years ago to where they are today, subsequent to President Trump signing that into law. Literally nothing's changed. So there's been a lot, in my opinion, there's been a lot of mischaracterization about that particular vote, just because it is an extremely complex issue. And I've actually had to spend a lot of time looking at it, because I say to myself, yeah, we need to make sure people's privacy rights are protected.
All right, well, unless I think we're about done here. We've run through a lot of the questions. We certainly appreciate time.
Why don't you come on up?
Okay.
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Thank you so much for coming out here today. I really appreciate it. Okay, so I just wanted to follow up because the Russian
investigation, which I know a lot of people were talking about, is really probably the top concern that I have. And I know what you just said about going through Congress and seeing where that might fall out may occur, but there are two things that I want to point out. Number one, Congress doesn't necessarily have the resources to fully investigate that at the place that it needs to go. And also, Republicans have normally strongly have supported independent investigations. Benghazi.
You go back to Clinton?
Yeah, even so. Why? So I guess it feels a little hypocritical that when it's, on the other party, that it's not being promoted, particularly with this this issue, being that it is inherently political in nature. So I do feel that Congress going through this is ill-advised, and with Nunes having to step down, that's just like further. I feel like that's a further
blemish?
nail. Yes, blemish.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm good with that. So here's what I think. Ken, make sure you're not getting the windows.
No, I'm not.
Okay. Because that's the whole thing here. President Judge can't have the windows or ingress, egress points. When the report comes out, and there will be reports coming out, at that moment in time, you'll be able to see what evidence was reviewed, what evidence was not reviewed, what remains confidential. At this moment in time, I don't even know what the intelligence committees are reviewing, nor does anyone here, because it's classified. And so without, there's known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. We're in unknown unknowns as it relates to what the intelligence committee is actually looking at. And when those findings, when the findings come out by the House Intelligence Committee, the Democratic House Intelligence Committee members will be able to issue a statement that they disagree with the findings of the majority, that they need additional information that should be reviewed. So I just feel like that we should see what is said, because those members are investigating this, and they're entitled and are reviewing highly sensitive classified information. And once I read all of that, then I'll be in a much better position to answer the question earlier about should there be an additional follow-up or an additional commission charged with certain additional investigative powers. I don't know. I don't.
Independent prosecutor now.
Great, thank you all very much for coming. We appreciate it. We do appreciate it. Do you want to take it over? I'll tell you what we can do. WCHE 1520 AM, the Congressman is often on 7 to 10 AM, or call any time to ask any question or debate any issue.
Yeah, the other thing to point out is anytime constituents write my staff's going to kill me, but when you write letters to my office, I always respond with my position. Yeah. No, that'll happen. That happens.
For 2 months, I sent the same letter to your office, and I have yet to get a response.
Yeah, you'll get a response.
All right, thank you again very much for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.